So just so I can just go through some simple questions from my perspective so I can sort of understand here. So your members, how would you classify your members?
Yeah, our members are the importers of motor vehicles and motorcycles into this country. In terms of motor vehicle sales, we're around about 99% per annum of total sales by our membership. Okay.
So when you say importers, is it like the manufacturers? So would that be, for example, is General Motors Holden one of your members?
Yeah, General Motors Holden is our member. So just to make the distinction, Senator, it is many brands are bought in by a representative of their brand in Australia, and then other times other organisations have the distribution rights for vehicles in the country for the brand. And I can give you an example of that. Subaru, Citroen and Peugeot in this country are imported and distributed by Inchcape, which is a UK-based firm.
Okay, all right. So in your, so do you as an organisation, your members might, but do you as an organisation have any sort of working relationship then with the retailers of the new vehicles?
Well, we represent our members' interests, and we have regular dialogue with other industry bodies such as the AADA and the MTAA, which have been before you today. So we have discussions there, but we have very little connection directly to dealers.
Okay, so it's sort of industry body to industry body rather
Typically,
than,
yes.
than you to directly with the retailers. Okay. So in your submission, you to this inquiry, you were quite strong in this one when I think about it, that the relationship between vehicle importers, so I suppose your members and dealers, is not what you would consider to be a franchise sort of relationship. Are you able to expand on that? I know you did touch upon it in your submission, but this would be good for the evidence here today.
Sure. So the reason why automotive dealers are part of the franchising code is because they are written in rather than coming under the natural definition of a franchise. It is, Mr. McDonald, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like a footnote to the franchising code. If you take the pure definition as set out by that code, we would not be picked up.
Okay. Could you actually, just for my benefit, could you expand upon that for me so I understand that a bit more fully? Sorry, please.
Well, I think, Senator, in the franchise code, there's a number of tests that say this is what a franchise is. The arrangements in new motor vehicle distribution don't meet those tests, such as there's a fee payable on entry and purchase of the franchise, there's royalties payable on sale, and there may be goodwill or things like that. We don't have any of that in new motor vehicle dealerships. What happens is that we sell product to the dealer. That's it, full stop. They then sell and keep the money. We wholesale vehicles. But within the franchise code, I think it's section 5.4, there's a little footnote that says new motor vehicle dealerships will be treated as franchises for the purposes of this code, and that's why we're part of it. So where we've got a whole lot of inquiries, such as the Joint Parliamentary Committee inquiry into franchising at the moment, that covers such a breadth of different industries that are true franchises, but it also covers automotive because of that one clause in the code, and that's the only reason why.
Well, I suppose that I'm advised that the dealer agreement is 693 pages in length. That seems quite a large document.
The disclosure document?
Yes.
Sounds like a franchise to me.
No, the policies and procedures manual is, I'm told, is 693 pages in length. Do you think that is common, or there would be similar agreements across with other franchisor relationships? Because that seems a pretty detailed document in relation of the expectations that are placed upon dealers.
I don't know that it's so much about expectations as explanations. I think the idea of a disclosure document under the Franchise Code is exactly that. It's to ensure that all parties have got as much relevant information as they can get. I, to be frank with you, have not ever seen a dealership agreement because they're held confidentially, and all our members would have different agreements, and it's quite frankly nothing that they discuss with us. What we work at is the framework that sets the regulatory environment for them establishing that dealership agreement. So I don't know whether that's an excessive amount of paperwork. It probably is by most standards. Whether it is relative to other franchise businesses, I'm sorry, I've got no idea. We could take that on notice if you like, Senator.
If you could. Now, while a franchise fee is not charged, it's my understanding, speaking to dealers out on the road, is they do have to make significant investments in facilities, equipment, signage. I'm reading here, communication systems, advertising support, parts and vehicle inventories, and so forth. Do you think in some way that may constitute a franchise fee? Almost like a pay-to-play requirement?
No, well, look, I can't comment on a franchise fee because we don't deal with franchises directly, but it's certainly an investment in the business that you would need to sell motor vehicles. If you want to term that something else, then that's fine, but I don't see it as a fee. It's basically an investment to get a return.
Okay. Would you accept that there is a power imbalance between, and we're talking particularly now in relation to how General Motors Holden treated the Holden dealers in relation to the decision to retire the Holden brand. Do you believe there is a power imbalance, or would you suggest that the relationship between the manufacturers and the retailers is of equal power?
Well, I think the scenario we have here, and as I said in my opening statement, there's an enormous amount of sadness in this. But when a decision like that is made, I think that is a very unusual situation. We've never had such an iconic brand as Holden leave the market in the last 70 years. And there are numerous issues with that. Brands leave on a regular basis. That's part of having a dynamic open market. And part of that is brands leave, but the other part of it is that consumers get value for money. And studies have shown that the Australian market is one of the most competitive in the world, and that's reflected in pricing. So this is a complex issue, and the reality is the vast majority of the time, brands work very closely with their dealers because success for the dealer equates to success for the brand, and that's what you want. You want to work together. So typically it's a very harmonious relationship of working together for mutual success.
Do you think that's happened in this instance?
Well, yes, I do. Holden's been a very valuable part of the Australian automotive industry for a very long time. And that success has come through that relationship between head office and their dealer network. Now, that's over a long period of time. Clearly, that has been the case. That's where that success comes from, because both arms have to work in unison for success.
But I don't think a committee of the Senate would be looking into this matter if the Senate was of a view that the relationship was harmonious. I mean, the Senate passed a motion referring this inquiry to the Senate Education and Employment References Committee because of concerns in relation to, in terms of the terms of reference, but that imbalance of relationship, that unhappy relationship that now exists between General Motors and the Holden dealers.
So, Senator, I think you're referring to the last period of this very long relationship, and it's very understandable that dealers are very disappointed that Holden is no longer participating in the Australian market, and I'm sure there are many, many people at head office who are also extremely disappointed that Holden will no longer be participating in the Australian market. Because the people in head office have also lost their employment. So there's great sadness all round. I understand that. And I feel very sorry for all the people involved.
Mm. But I suppose this sadness that you've expressed and that General Motors also expressed sadly does not seem to have, from the perspective of the dealers, turned into what they would say is a fair settlement. My understanding is that the Holden dealers were quite sincere in their attempts to have a negotiation with General Motors. That they weren't after a special deal, but they were after to have a negotiation discussion. But that notwithstanding the sadness that you're expressing and that General Motors expressed, that this sadness certainly did not evolve into a serious attempt at negotiation to resolve a settlement that could be acceptable to both sides.
Well, fundamental to that question is whether the offer made by Holden was appropriate or not, and I'm just not in a position to answer that question. But underlying that goes back to my previous point. Obviously, there's a lot of disappointment about what's happened, a lot of sadness, and then there's a question of judgment about what was appropriate, given the unique circumstances around historically one of the biggest brands leaving the market, which has never happened before.
In your submission, you also touched upon how you would, I suppose, classify dealers, and you brought up the example, I think, of Eagers, in terms of they've been purchased and they're now quite a large business. But I suppose my experience, especially in regional Queensland, is that most businesses in regional Queensland are actually what I would call family businesses. Yes, they're not what you'd call a small business. Yeah. They're a medium to large business, and often they are sometimes the largest private sector employer in some of these towns. And we heard evidence before from Inverell, Italy, south of the border, who employs 32 people in Inverell. The fact that these businesses may not be a mum and dad business in a way, but they are a medium business, I don't think that should take away from that there still is this power imbalance. and I don't think we've sort of adequately got to the bottom of that yet. That yes, there might be an Eagers out on one side, but most of, if not a lot of the dealerships are generational. Evidence today that the one from Inverell first started in 1912 before, and then became part of General Motors and the Holden family from 1948. I just want to understand: is there an understanding or an acceptance that there is this imbalance, and this can be prejudicial to the interests of consumers?
So, over my time in this position, I've met with a number of dealers, and typically they're very astute business people. And I've met with a number of regional dealers, which is something I've enjoyed very much, I'd have to say. And typically they have multi-franchise dealerships. They have access, as I said before, to the best legal taxation advice. They have very strong business acumen, either within the business or they can access it. So these people are sophisticated business investors who typically have run dealerships for long periods of time and done it very, very successfully. And they certainly know how to negotiate and run a business.
And that might be the case, but that possibly even shows the power balance even more, that such sophisticated, experienced business people are in a relationship with manufacturers who have so much power over them. And this comes to, I suppose, the compensation offer that was put to the dealers. Do you think that compensation offer was a fair offer, or does your organisation have a view on that offer?
So let me just go back to something else you said. The dealers, the power balance between the two is an interesting discussion, because typically these well-established dealers have control, if not ownership, of the site. The site typically is very vital. Typically, the older dealers have bigger sites, represent the historically stronger brands in the marketplace, and therefore they, in many ways, have a greater power in the relationship with my member, the OEM, because of what they control and the fact that they can, if they wish, quite often change and go with a different brand. And you see that diversification, and the fact that I think that this morning I heard that 90% plus, or 90% of Holden dealers were multi-franchise. So I think that's really absolutely essential to this debate, to understand that kind of relationship.
I don't think that's borne out by what happened to the Holden dealers in relation to why we're here at the moment.
Well,
in that General Motors came in and with 15 minutes notice to them, told them that they were retiring the Holden brand. That 185 dealers, 203 dealerships, 185 dealers across Australia were blindsided by this announcement, that where they had an expectation in terms of this relationship. They had been fulfilling their obligations, but we have a manufacturer give 15 minutes advance warning that they're retiring the brand. I think, if anything, that shows that there is a power imbalance.
Well, Senator, I would have thought in those kind of commercial relationships, you don't telegraph your moves. Last thing you want is rumours going around that brand X is about to depart the country. I would have thought in those circumstances, if you made a decision, you'd make the decision and then you'd go public with it, with your dealers, and more broadly, very quickly. And that was the evidence that Holden provided this morning. So I understand that, and I would have thought that that was the appropriate thing to do under the circumstances.
But I suppose it might be what General Motors thinks was an appropriate thing to do, but we're talking about, in terms of your earlier comments, about a very long-standing relationship in Australia between the manufacturer, being General Motors Holden, and the Holden dealers. That whether you say it began in 1948 or back in the in the 20s or 30s, an 89-year relationship is ended so abruptly, and then not just ended abruptly, but that the compensation that has been offered is seen by the Holden dealers, and this is where the bargaining power. This is where I'm coming from. I do not dispute, and I can't speak for other members of the committee, that General Motors, as a commercial entity, have the right to act in the best interest of their shareholders. That is up to General Motors. But what I am concerned about is that the power imbalance where General Motors decide to retire the Holden brand and then fail to negotiate sincerely and in good faith with the Holden dealers, and that the Holden dealers effectively have no choice but to sign up to a compensation deal that has not changed after many months. And such is the fear that the dealers have. That's why very few of them have come forward to give evidence. We've got the Inverell dealer, but because they are so concerned for their future. So me looking at that, I think there is a power imbalance that leads into fear, and I just would like your response to those observations.
Okay. Well, I think working in my position, the one thing that I've learnt in this job is the worst thing that can happen is rumour floating around in things you're about to do and they're not in the public domain. If it gets leaked, that is the worst possible outcome. And I think that would be terrible if dealers found out through the press reports that a brand was about to leave. So I think moving quickly in balance is the right thing to do. The second question is the adequacy of the offer. Now, I don't have the background material nor the expertise to make that analysis. I'm not involved in Holden or any other of my brands' relationships between the brand and their dealership network. That is a question of balance, and I heard this morning once again that PricewaterhouseCoopers have done some analysis on that from Mr. Aquilina. So it's very difficult for me to make a judgment about those things. But that goes, I would have thought, to the essence of the issue here. If that is adequate, well, then there's no issue here. As sad as it is, there is no issue.
Well, we might disagree about being adequate or not, but Senator Pratt, I might hand back to you.